Good evening and welcome to Linkmate's first virtual event of 2021, Finding Resilience. Before we kick off, can I just please ask that everyone keeps their microphones muted until we get to the Q&A a little bit later on. My name is David Tittel and I will be hosting tonight's webinar with the wonderful Maureen. I'm the founder and director at Linkmate, and on behalf of the entire team, thanks so much for taking the time to be with us today. I would like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of country where I'm zooming in from tonight, Wurundjeri, Woiwurrung and Bunurong people of the Kulin Nation, and recognise their continuing connection to the land.
It's just a fantastic, transformative journey of Achitika. I know it's really tough sometimes, and just have the most incredible respect for teachers who continually front up, doing with their passion what they know is the right thing.
Mute. There we go. That's just that easy. I pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging, and acknowledge all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders here today. I'd encourage you all to pay respects to the traditional owners of the land that you're on tonight, wherever you are in Victoria or Australia. So for tonight's talk on finding resilience, we're going to explore what steps we can take to embrace our vulnerabilities, find our voices again, and use this understanding to overcome adversity. So the way tonight's going to work, after we introduce Maureen, we'll have a bit of a discussion for 15-20 minutes or so before opening up the floor to questions, which should take us to 6 p.m. And you're more than welcome to drop any questions you have in the chat thread as we go along. So with that in mind, I'd like to introduce Maureen Williams. Maureen has lived with Addison's disease for over 40 years and has been admitted to the emergency department more than 100 times. She has been involved with many colleges and institutions as a passionate advocate for the patient voice. She has a postgraduate diploma in counselling and recently obtained her master's in public health. I met Maureen at a conference earlier this year and was really touched by her story and advocacy in mental and physical health. It's really always lovely hearing her speak. And with that, I'd like to hand over to her. Maureen, can you please share with us a bit more about yourself and your story?
Thanks, David. I'd like to start by acknowledging the Camaragal peoples, and they are the custodians of the land where I am, and also to thank David very much for inviting me here to talk about resilience. Resilience means a lot of things, but for tonight's talk, something that I found is that it is the ability to confront adversity and still find hope and meaning in life. So that probably represents my story of resilience. And I think that we all as children learn to a greater or lesser degree some resilience, depending upon the childhood that you've had. And that my defining time was my early 30s, which was now over 40 years ago, but we won't dwell on that. And at that time, I was living my dream. I had for 7 years been trying desperately to have a child, and I eventually had a delightful little boy. And at the same time, I was studying to be a singer. I was given what would probably represent the opportunity of a lifetime, certainly for singers it was. At that time, I was invited to go to the studio in London of a world-famous accompanist and teacher. And I was told that I had a world-class voice and a very promising career. It was the experience of a lifetime and will be something that I'll always remember with great pride and joy. That at that time, my life was good, and then it wasn't. I became quite ill at that point in time. I lost a lot of weight. I lost the top notes of my voice. I was nauseous and vomiting. I couldn't sing. My skin looked dirty, and I was actually really ill. Back in Australia, I consulted doctor after doctor after doctor to try and find out what was wrong with me. And they all told me there was nothing wrong. During that time, I was diagnosed as a malingerer, an attention seeker, a neurotic, and a Munchausen's. I knew that there was something desperately wrong with me, and therefore I started to think that perhaps I was going insane. I became suicidal, and I was absolutely desperate. So on my own initiative, I went to RPA and I asked if there was such a person as a diagnostician. And I went into this man's office and said, I need to see somebody. I need someone to tell me what is wrong with me. He took one look at me and said, are you always suntanned? And I said, no, I'm never suntanned. I blister and burn in the sun. And he said, I bet you've got Addison's disease and you'll make my day. And I did. Addison's disease is a very rare autoimmune disease, which is potentially life-threatening. There is no cure. And in some ways, although I'd been given that really bad news, it was a relief to know that I did have something which had a name. So I was told that I was near death when that was diagnosed, and I was really very, very ill. The end result was that I lost my voice and my career, which was a bitter pill to swallow, and my marriage broke down. So instead of gracing the halls of opera houses, as I had hoped to do, at the age of 34, I had nowhere to live. I had no money. I had no job. I had a 5-year-old, and I had a chronic illness. So that was the point for me when I learned what resilience was. I realized that I had two choices, that I could either allow myself to be defined by what had happened to me and say, this isn't fair, which it wasn't, it shouldn't happen to me, it should, why is this happening? And then I would be a victim. Or I could say, this has happened to me and I can't change it. So how can I choose to go on and what can I learn from it in order to get on with my life? So I found a crappy 2-room flat, which had no hot water in the kitchen and a bathroom in the hallway. I found a job, I found a family daycare mother, and I got on with it. And I got on with it so that I could give my son a life and so that I could find meaning in mine. So that's my story, David.
Thank you so much, Maureen, for sharing that so candidly with us. It can be really incredibly challenging when you're in that dark place to then find the strength within you to keep pushing when, you know, from what you've said, so much had been taken from you. How did you learn to begin to embrace those vulnerabilities, to move away from being a victim to being resilient, and using those experiences as a learning tool?
I guess that for me, it's about finding your authentic voice. I think that the authentic voice is the voice that we all have. That's that little voice in our ear that sometimes says when we're talking to somebody, oh, I don't like that, or I wish they didn't say that, or those sorts of feelings are your authentic voice coming through. And I think, unfortunately, we don't listen to that voice very often. And so many of us don't find the time or the space to allow ourselves to hear ourselves think, because it's the thoughts that come through all the time and the feelings that we have that are our authentic self. But quite often we bury them because we think, oh, I better not say that. They might think I'm stupid, or somebody might be offended. And so we find a persona that suits us rather than who we are authentically. I remember that when I was in therapy, one thing that really helped me was that I saw myself as a bag lady. and that I was carrying around all these bags which had labels that had been given to me by other people. So that I had a label that said, you can't do maths. I had a label that said, you're a bloody rat bag from my father. I had a label that said, you'll never amount to anything. And so we subconsciously take these labels from other people and put them on ourselves. When I was teaching singing, I had students who'd say to me, oh, I can't sing in a class. Don't ask me to sing, I can't sing. And I'd say, why would you say that? And they'd say, well, when I was in kindergarten, the teacher said, you be quiet, you're out of tune. And so forevermore, that adolescent carried around that label that said, I can't sing. And so for me to be able to take the time to look at the other people's baggage that I've picked up and carried with me, and to take out those bags and look at it and say, is this the truth of who I am? Because if it's not, you need to chuck it out and find out what is the truth of who you are and not the truth of what you think other people want to see.
Absolutely, yeah. The labels that people can apply can become your identity in a way, and you can identify with them so strongly that all the clouds kind of obscure your true self. You mentioned finding your authentic voice to break free of those challenges and labels. Like how did you, when physically and mentally you lost your voice, how did you find that courage to speak up and show your true colors and sort of defy all of the labels that had been put on you?
It wasn't easy. I started life in a very working class family in Orange, and my dad was a disciplinarian, and we were children who could be seen and not heard. So in order for me even to do opera was a huge journey to learn that it was okay for me, that I actually had some worth. And I think that that's the next point that I'd like to talk about is finding your own self-worth and knowing that you have your own best answers. Because in this world that we live in technology and all the masses of information that we have, we tend, when something goes wrong in our lives, to immediately look outside of ourselves. An analogy is what's happening in medicine. When I was diagnosed with Addison's 42 years ago, I saw a man called a diagnostician. And he was someone who took the whole person. It was holistic medicine. He looked at every part of that person and made the diagnosis. Whereas we've now become so specialized that if you've got a problem that's a mental problem, you go to a psychiatrist. If you've got a sore shoulder, you go to a shoulder specialist, and he only does shoulders. If you've got a knee, you go to someone who only does knees and hips. And therefore, I believe that nobody's really looking at the whole person. And so I think that it's our responsibility, if we want to be seen as a whole person and an authentic person, that we take on the responsibility of finding our own worth. In this country, we knock tall poppies down. We look at negatives rather than positives. And I think that if people take the time to look at what can I do well, what are my strengths, and what am I able to build on those? And for me, it was voice. I mean, I started as a singer, then I became a counsellor. I did voice therapy with children recovering from people recovering from stroke and children with disabilities. And then I'm now doing work as a patient advocate, speaking on behalf of patients. So for me, my strength was the voice and being able to express what it is that I'd learned and what I was feeling. So I think that for anyone who is unsure about where they're going or who they are or what they want to do with their life, the great news is that the answer is right inside of yourself. We all need community. We need friends. We need we need mentors, we need counsellors, but we have our own best answers. You know, people used to come to me in counselling and say, I want you to tell me what to do. I need your advice. But we were complete strangers. So how could I possibly know what that person needed? But they knew themselves. They just needed someone to listen and someone to give them clarity around what their choices are. Because we all have our own best answers. And that's the exciting thing for me. That's what I've learned.
Definitely. Yeah. Something that stuck out to me was that, oh, got a bit of an echo, that constant seeking externally, and social media doesn't help at all, because it also creates these unrealistic expectations of what true happiness looks like. And many do, as you said, Maureen, try and address what's wrong with themselves when nothing's wrong. And all of these clinicians are, for the most part, looking at bringing you back to normal, but by actually nurturing what you love and what your strengths are, it actually can move you in a positive direction much more meaningfully. And acknowledging your worth is such a powerful way to do that. And it sounds like a lot of that comes from self-care and learning how to look after yourself, which is, particularly important now as we're still charging through.
Yeah, another aspect of that, which I learned in working with some people, is the analogy of thinking about yourself like you're a bucket. And if you keep giving out of the bucket, it will eventually empty. However, if you take the time to take care of your own physical, emotional, and nurturing needs, then you fill the bucket up, and you're then giving from the overflow. And that's a very, very different energy. I'm a nurturer, and my life has been give, give, give. And it was very hard for me to turn the focus back in on myself and to make myself a whole person, so that anything that I gave from that position then had a completely different energy. Because sometimes when you give, 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 you get quite resentful. But if you're giving from an overflow and you've taken care of yourself, then it is a completely different feeling. That's what I found anyway.
How do you fill up? Right.
How do I what? Sorry.
How do you fill up your bucket?
That's a good question. I don't always, but you do it by just taking time out to make sure that you're doing the things that you want to do and that you need to do, and taking care of others, and trying to keep yourself as fit and well as possible, and doing things that feed your brain. I mean, the Masters was probably the biggest challenge I've ever done in my life, and I didn't really expect to do it. But when you achieve something, and it can be something little. I mean, if you're in a relationship with someone and there's some unspoken feeling that's not very pleasant, you can set a really small task for yourself by calling it out, by actually going to that person and saying, this is how I feel, and can we talk about it? And little small steps like that can help you to become authentic and to learn resilience, because then you know that you can do it. And then the next time it's not quite so difficult.
Absolutely. Yeah, those small wins on the board build self-esteem and confidence little by little, until you are in that state of self-care perpetually. That's really beautiful. Thank you, Maureen. I might pause there. I just want to open it up to the questions from everyone. And I just noticed we've got one from Romaine. Romaine says, that's very useful to think of a bag with labels others have thrust on us. I was sharing that with a Facebook friend this morning about bullies who were my supervisors. What did you do to get over those labels?
To get rid of the labels?
Yes. Yeah. What did you do to get over those labels?
Well, if you can have the sort of imagery of the bag lady, you take out a bag and you look at it, and you know, for instance, if we use one of mine that says you're absolutely hopeless at maths, which was something that I believed all my life until I met a lovely lady called Anne, and you open that bag and ask yourself, is this the truth of who I am? Do I really believe that this is who I am? And if you don't believe that's who you are, then you look at it and think, well, I don't need this anymore. This was given to me by someone else, and it's not the truth of who I am. And you chuck it out and look in the next one until you're done.
Definitely, yeah. Sitting with it and processing it and realizing it's not you. It's just a label, and that's all. Lovely. Were there any other questions from anyone here?
Yeah, I had a question. Thank you so much, Maureen. It's been really just heartening to hear your experiences and your, I guess, simple analogies to help us kind of reflect on, I guess, our own past stories and the stories that we continually tell ourselves about labels. I guess my question is, during some of the really tough times when, you know, you first were working through your diagnosis, how did you keep your hope alive? How did you kind of keep that pilot light lit in terms of, you know, seeing a better outcome or better days ahead?
That's a good question, actually, because after I was diagnosed, I ran a support group for people with Addison's for a number of years. And unfortunately, there are quite a number who died before they got their diagnosis. People with Addison's disease tend not to look sick. And so that's part of the reason why it's very difficult to get a diagnosis, along with the fact that when you're doing normal blood tests, the only abnormality that you will find is a cortisol level, and that's not done generally in a normal blood profile. So I guess to answer your question, I knew in my heart of hearts that there was something really wrong, and I guess that I'm a reasonably strong person, and I refuse to accept the labels of malingerer and because I just knew. And so what kept me going was that I had a little boy who was only 2, the love of my life, and I didn't want to leave him. I didn't want to accept that there was nothing I could do. I mean, there was one stage when I was suicidal. I lived on a street that was very busy and had lots of trucks, and I actually stood there and contemplated throwing myself under the truck, because I was so ill and I was so tired of being told there was nothing wrong with me. But I guess that I just had this urge to keep going, Felicia, and it's very hard to name that.
Yeah, I understand. Thank you. It's just, it sounds like it was a really overwhelming time, but just to see someone like yourself overcome obstacles like that, it does inspire hope in me anyway, personally. So thank you. Thank you for being you.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Love that. Thank you, Felicia. Were there any other questions? If not, we might wrap it up there. That was a quick session, but a very meaningful session and talk. And thank you so much, Maureen, on behalf of you know, the team and everyone here. It's really yeah, really empowering to hear you speak and share.
Come on in. Come.
So thank you, and yeah, we'll hope to see everyone at the next one.
My pleasure. Thank you very much for asking me, David, and thank you, everybody.